All right, welcome back, curious minds, to another deep dive. We've got a truly significant, even kind of heartbreaking story on our plate today. Siena Heights University, a Catholic institution over a century of history, founded way back in 1919. It's sadly closing its doors after the 2025-2026 academic year. That's
Yeah.
after 105 years. That's, well, that's a profound moment, isn't
It absolutely is, yeah.
it?
And while this news about Siena Heights in Adrian, Michigan is specific, our deep dive today isn't just about, their individual fate. It's really about what their story reveals. It's like a powerful microcosm of the complex and, frankly, increasingly challenging landscape facing higher education across the country.
That's right, yeah. And to bring you the full, nuanced picture, we've pulled from, well, a fascinating array of sources, everything from official university documents like their student code of conduct to in-depth news reports that chronicle their struggles, and even some like candid online discussions that maybe shed light on internal dynamics.
hmm Our mission today is really to unpack the entire journey of Siena Heights, from its foundational values and the incredibly intricate student life policies they built,
Hmm.
all the way to the very real financial and operational struggles that ultimately sealed their fate. You'll not only uncover some surprising facts about how a university operates, but also gain critical insights into the broader pressures facing small, private universities. It helps you understand just how delicate that balance truly is for these institutions trying to thrive.
Okay, so let's start at the very beginning then. Siena Heights University's identity was deeply rooted in its founding by the Adrian Dementon sisters. It was a Catholic institution with a mission statement that seemed to, truly guide everything they did to assist people to become more competent, purposeful, and ethical through a teaching and learning environment which respects the dignity of all. Dignity of all, that's key.
It is. And what's truly fascinating here is how deeply those foundational values, especially that respect for the dignity of all, permeated, well, every aspect, particularly student life. The university was organized around what they call the four pillars of Dominican life. You have prayer, study, community, and service. Student affairs, in particular, really focused on fostering growth in mind, body, and spirit to help students truly embrace their purpose. It wasn't just about academics, it was about the whole person, that holistic development.
Right. And they really seemed to put their money where their mouth was when it came to fostering a sense of belonging. Their university belonging statement highlighted a strong commitment to justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, or GDI, as they termed it. Interesting acronym. The goal was to actively break down barriers and invite meaningful exchange, all to create an environment where, again, the dignity of every individual was not just acknowledged, but celebrated. What really stands out to me here, especially for a Catholic institution, is the explicit mention of sexual orientation in their non-discrimination policy. Was that particularly progressive, or is that more standard now?
That's an excellent
Yeah.
observation.
Yeah.
Yeah. While non-discrimination policies are, increasingly common, explicitly naming sexual orientation, particularly within a faith-based institution, it really signals a deliberate and, I'd say, progressive embrace of inclusivity. It feels like pushing beyond maybe traditional interpretations to truly live out that dignity of all mission. Their student development model further reinforced this, with 5 core areas where students were expected to infuse the university's mission. Their ambition was really quite grand. They wanted students to cast a personal vision, to go out and be who they should be, and quite literally set the world on fire.
Yeah.
You can just feel the high ideals they had for their graduates.
It sounds like an incredibly principled and well-intentioned mission. A lot of passion there, but the stark reality is they're closing. So how do you reconcile that? What was the fundamental disconnect between these high ideals and the eventual, financial collapse?
It's a painful disconnect, definitely. And it really comes down to the stark financial reality that continuing operations is no longer feasible. That's the official word. Despite incredible dedication from faculty, staff, students, supporters, the numbers simply told a different story. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it ultimately boiled down to severe cash flow and liquidity concerns. Just not enough money coming in. For instance, in fiscal year 2024, the university reported an operating deficit, so spending more than they took in from core activities, and that was after having a surplus the year prior.
Wow, that's a dramatic swing. And their actual cash on hand by year end was incredibly low, just over $435,000. For a university, I mean, to put that in perspective, that's barely enough to cover maybe a few weeks of operational expenses. And their operating cash flow, the money coming in versus going out from core activities, it plummeted by nearly 75% in just one year. That's a huge red flag.
It truly is a massive warning sign. And compounding that, they were actively using cash for investing activities, about $1.31 million, essentially spending money on things like new buildings or equipment, which suggests they were maybe trying to invest their way out of a problem, but without the underlying cash flow, this became a significant drain. It looks like they were heavily relying on a line of credit, too. Over $1.1 million provided by financing activities, which means borrowing significant amounts just to keep operations afloat.
Wow. So they're not just burning cash from operations, they're borrowing heavily, spending on investments. And it triggered warnings from auditors, right? A going concern warning.
Exactly. Auditors issued that going concern warning in 2024, which basically means they doubted the university could financially continue for another year. They weren't complying with financial stipulations on their line of credit. And it got serious enough that the Department of Education actually intervened, demanding a $1.5 million letter of credit, basically proof they could cover potential losses.
Okay, so the feds are involved, auditors are worried, and it seems they were really leaning on donor support too. How common is that for institutions in this kind of financial distress?
It's quite common, actually, especially for smaller mission-driven institutions like Siena Heights, but it also signals vulnerability if that support isn't consistent or, well, guaranteed. And for Siena Heights, it seems it wasn't quite consistent enough. Contributions from the Adrian Dominican sisters, who founded the university, were substantial, over $3 million in 2024. But that was actually down from $3.6 million the year before. A significant drop. And pledges from related parties, like expected future donations, they just plummeted from over $804,000 down to a mere $17,000.
17,000 from over 800,000.
Yeah.
That's a massive loss of expected revenue, a huge
A critical hit.
But here's where it gets, I think, truly concerning. It raises serious questions about governance, about oversight. Apparently, a shocking $4.19 million was withdrawn from donor-restricted endowments in fiscal year 2023 for non-approved purposes.
This actually led to a court-ordered repayment at a high 9% interest rate.
Yeah.
I mean, using restricted funds improperly, that's major.
It definitely is. They did eventually repay it, but the very fact that this happened and needed a court to step in, it points to some deep structural issues, maybe a lack of internal controls. And on top of that mountain of problems, they were also burdened by significant long-term debt, over $11.7 million, plus an additional $1.9 million drawn on that line of credit we mentioned. And compounding this, as of June 30, 2024, the university was officially out of compliance with debt service and capital expenditure covenants. Those are specific financial rules lenders put on loans. And they hadn't obtained a waiver. That's a very serious signal to creditors. Your lenders are getting nervous. Right. And this brings us to a critical, almost, poetic detail regarding the timing of the closure announcement. That $4 million line of credit they'd been using for operating expenses. It was set to expire on June 30th, 2025, which was the very same day the closure announcement was actually made. It really sounds like the financial clock just simply ran out, like that was the deadline.
It certainly looks that way. But it wasn't just about debt and cash flow, though. Enrollment pressures played a huge role, perhaps an existential role. Undergraduate enrollment dropped by almost 20% just from 2012 to 2022. And their overall fall headcount fell nearly 25% between 2018 and 2023, down to just 1,832 students. Fewer students means less tuition revenue. And that's the lifeblood of most small private universities.
Yeah, and despite a stated annual tuition, fees, room, and board package of nearly $46,000, which sounds like a lot, over 90% of undergraduate students received some form of financial aid, which indicates significant tuition discounting, right? Meaning the university wasn't actually collecting anywhere near its sticker price per student.
Exactly. It's a classic catch-22 for these schools. You lower the effective price with aid to attract students in a competitive market, but then you don't bring in enough actual revenue to cover your rising costs.
A really tough spot.
Precisely. And it's important to acknowledge, it wasn't for a lack of trying to avert closure. They weren't just sitting still. They reported a record incoming freshman class for fall 2024. They cut expenses to balance the FY 2025 budget. They had new enrollment and marketing plans in the works. But as the university themselves stated, these efforts ultimately proved insurmountable. Just too little, too late, perhaps.
So despite all those efforts, the financial hole was just too deep. Okay. But to truly understand Siena Heights and maybe what they were trying so hard to preserve, it's worth taking a look at the deeply specific culture they built. What their rulebook and student life policies reveal about their core identity and ideals. even as the walls were metaphorically closing in.
That's right. Yeah, what's fascinating here is the detailed framework Siena Heights had in place to manage its community.
Hmm.
You often find this in smaller, mission-driven institutions.
Yeah.
They viewed their student conduct system not as some punitive legal process, but as an educational experience, informal in nature. Focusing on determining responsibility, sure, but really facilitating growth, which aligns directly with their mission of developing the whole person.
Okay, so educational, not just punitive. And they had a very clear and comprehensive framework for student rights, didn't they? They outlined things like freedom from discrimination, which we mentioned included sexual orientation, the pursuit of educational goals, participation in student government, and the right to fair hearings for serious sanctions. With proper notice, the right to respond, question witnesses, even have a support person present. That seems pretty robust.
It is. And students also had rights to privacy under FERPA, protecting educational records, and HIPAA for health information. Both critical safeguards, especially on a campus, and of course, with those rights came clear responsibilities. The other side of the coin. Students were expected to uphold the community by respecting others' growth and rights, maintaining university facilities, and upholding the university's positive reputation. It paints a picture of a very intentional, almost kind of familial community where everyone was expected to contribute positively.
Right. Right. Now, here's a policy that truly stands out. It makes you wonder how it came about. They had this surprising and I'd say progressive policy regarding amnesty for active bystanders. Students who assisted others in need, say, in cases of sexual assault or serious injury, could actually receive amnesty for maybe minor policy violations they committed at the time, like underage drinking or marijuana use. And this amnesty also applied if they self-reported to get assistance. That feels rare
Yeah.
and commendable.
It really does. It speaks volumes about their priorities, putting student safety and well-being potentially above strict rule enforcement in critical moments.
Yeah.
The university also had broad jurisdiction, interestingly. It applied to off-campus conduct if it adversely affected the university community. So your actions off-campus could still have consequences on campus. Their list of prohibited conduct gives you a vivid sense of their expectations, too. Things like alcohol misuse, even if you were of legal age, there were still rules. Dishonesty, both academic and general. Hazing, with a really detailed definition and a zero-tolerance approach, regardless of consent or location. That's a common and important focus for universities now.
Yeah, definitely. They also covered dating and domestic violence, sexual misconduct, and unauthorized recording, specifically mentioning surreptitiously taking pictures or video. That's certainly a sign of the times. And drug misuse, noting that marijuana was prohibited because of federal law, even if state law allowed it. You can see how they were navigating these modern complexities within their Catholic mission.
And university housing, wow, that came with a comprehensive set of its own rules, often focusing on safety and community standards. Beyond the standard stuff like no open flames, they got down to the specific types of appliances allowed, or even how you could decorate your room. It really speaks to how meticulously they tried to cultivate a particular living environment, maybe an effort to maintain that close-knit community feel they cherished.
You think, and talk about detail, they had specific rules for room decorations, down to the type of adhesive you could use. No screws, no tacks, no duct tape, only specific adhesives. And a 24-inch floor clearance for fire safety. It makes you wonder, doesn't it, what specific incidents drove them to such granular rules, or maybe just a desire for, meticulous order.
Could be. Pets were also prohibited, with standard exceptions for disabilities, and strict rules for trash disposal and room cleanliness, including charges for communal cleanup if the responsible parties weren't identified. It really sounds like they took that community pillar very seriously. Collective responsibility.
They absolutely did. Okay, so what about consequences if you broke these rules?
Well, when it came to consequences for violations, their sanctions ranged quite a bit, from educational measures like written warnings or discretionary sanctions, maybe community service, attending educational events, all the way to more severe outcomes like restitution, paying for damages, loss of privileges, things like campus parking, holding office, athletic participation. Then you had disciplinary probation, deferred suspension, suspension itself, temporary separation from campus, loss of student ID, and ultimately expulsion, permanent separation. They even had the power to revoke admission or degrees for past violations discovered later.
So a real spectrum. It wasn't just about punishment. It sounds like it was also about growth and upholding the community's integrity. And speaking of proactive measures, the university had a student care team. What was that about?
Yeah, that seemed like a really positive initiative dedicated to safety, support, and crisis intervention. They would step in for things like um, self-harm threats, dramatic behavior changes, maybe dangerous writing students produced. And notably, they had a policy for parental notification for serious issues, specifically for students under 21. A thoughtful approach to student well-being, involving families when necessary.
That makes sense.
And finally, just touching on it, the university had detailed resources and rules for property and services too, from bicycle registration and computer labs to kitchenettes that even included a SHU food pantry for students experiencing food insecurity. That's a nice touch. They also had laundry facilities with app-based payment, a 24/7 welcome center. Very practical stuff. It's also worth noting they provided $25,000 of liability insurance for residential students and strongly recommended personal property insurance. They really seemed to think through the details of campus life.
Okay, so we've delved into Siena Heights' founding principles, their really specific community guidelines, the intricate fabric of student life they aim to weave, but ultimately they're closing. So stepping back, what does this all mean in the broader context of higher education today?
Right. This is where Siena Heights becomes, unfortunately, a crucial case study. Their closure isn't really an isolated incident. It's part of a wider, nationwide trend of private college closures. Several big macro factors are at play here, things like declining birth rates, which means simply a smaller pool of traditional college-age students entering the pipeline, and also, a perceived decrease in the value of traditional liberal arts degrees in the current job market.
Yeah, that shrinking pool of potential students hits small colleges especially hard, doesn't it? Many of these institutions are heavily tuition dependent. They often have relatively small endowments. Siena Heights, for instance, had only about $8.1 million, which isn't much for a university's cushion. They struggle against rising operational costs and just intense competition from more affordable state schools and community colleges. It's almost like a financial thriller playing out in slow motion, one red flag after another.
It truly is. And adding another layer, what's also been surfaced in some online discussions, particularly on platforms like Reddit, are some serious allegations about internal struggles at Siena Heights. Now, we need to be clear. These are claims made by individuals online, not verified findings in our other sources. But they include things like a former VP for finance being under investigation for misusing COVID funds, which the university reportedly had to pay back, and allegations against the current president regarding harassment and retaliation. Again, allegations from online forums, but part of the narrative being discussed.
Right. Important to frame those correctly. Other allegations from these same online sources mention internal leadership issues, things like the firing of faculty and key enrollment leadership at critical times, and even concerns about academic quality. Some users claim that students were graduated even when missing required courses, that there was maybe an over-reliance on adjunct faculty, and that some academic programs were described pretty harshly, like a joke. This paints a picture of a potentially difficult internal environment alongside those huge external financial pressures.
Yeah, it adds complexity, and some observers looking at Siena Heights and similar closures characterize these struggles as part of a bursting bubble in higher education overall. They argue there's been a shift away from holistic development towards an almost exclusive focus on career-focused degrees. They also point to significant administrative bloat, rising costs there, and maybe even a potential degradation of academic rigor in some places, simply to maintain enrollment numbers and keep the doors open.
It's a complex and frankly kind of depressing picture for higher ed in some ways. But it is worth noting an ethical consideration regarding the closure itself. The university's decision to announce its closure a year and a half in advance, allowing for a full 2025-2026 academic year, that was seen by some as the ethical thing to do. It gave crucial time for students and faculty to plan their next steps, rather than just a sudden shutdown.
That's a fair point. That thoughtful approach to the wind-down, contrasted with the difficult realities of the financial situation and those allegations of internal issues. It certainly makes Siena Heights a compelling and, sobering case study for the entire higher education landscape.
So where does that leave us? We've journeyed from Siena Heights University's founding mission, its deeply articulated code of conduct aiming to foster the dignity of all the way to the undeniable financial realities, the leadership challenges, the internal struggles that ultimately forced its closure.
It's a striking paradox, isn't it? A university built on such high ideals, with such specific regulations for community and conduct, ultimately succumbing to this confluence of internal governance issues maybe, and these larger macro trends hammering higher education. When I look at these deeply articulated values, that passion, and then you lay the financial figures alongside them, it creates this real tension. It's a stark reminder, I think, that even the most well-intentioned missions can be undone by cold, hard, real-world economics and operational challenges.
So as the landscape of higher education continues to shift, maybe even contract, what does the closure of institutions like Siena Heights, with their deeply articulated values and extensive guidelines for community and conduct, truly mean for the future of specialized, mission-driven education? And maybe for you, the listener, how will those ideals we talked about, respecting the dignity of all, setting the world on fire, how will they continue to inspire learners like you to shape their own path forward, even as the institutions themselves face such uncertainty?